Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Saoirse Healey and tonight I'm joined by the wonderful friend of the show, Linda Fabiani. Linda, how are you this evening?
Absolutely fine, Sasha, and I hope you are too. I hope everyone is a lovely sunny evening.
Beautiful, beautiful evening. So we start off as always with our Ukraine update. It's day 463 of the war. 3 people, including a child, were killed and at least 11 were injured in an early morning missile attack on Kyiv that hit apartment buildings, 2 schools, and a children's clinic, according to city authorities. The attack on International Children's Day reportedly involved 10 Iskander short range missiles, and there was only a few minutes warning before they hit. Initial report said an 11-year-old girl, her mother, and another woman were killed. There were also children among the wounded. Nearly 500 children have been killed in military attacks in Ukraine since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February 2022. Andriy Sadovy, the mayor of Ukraine's western city of Lviv, has announced there will be an inspection of the operation of air shelters tonight in his city as a result. 8 people were wounded by overnight shelling that continued into the morning in the Russian town of Shebeninko that damaged multiple buildings. Vyacheslav Gladok, the governor of the local Belgorod region, has said. Vladimir Zelensky has urged the international community to put concrete security guarantees in place in Ukraine and its neighbours Moldova to give the countries enduring protection against Russia. NATO foreign ministers meeting in Oslo, where the French foreign minister Catherine Colonna said that the NATO alliance needed to think about what kind of security guarantees it could give Ukraine, and Lithuania's foreign minister Gabrielis Landsbergis said the time had come for NATO members to find a concrete answer to the question of how Ukraine could become a member. Sweden's foreign minister Tobias Billström is in Oslo and said the time had come for Turkey and Hungary to ratify his nation's NATO membership application. The US government has announced new £300 million arms package for Ukraine, including air defense systems and tens of millions of rounds of ammunition, but warned Kyiv that the US weaponry should not be used for attacks within Russia. A German government spokesperson on Wednesday said Ukraine has the right to attack Russian territory as it qualifies as self-defense. The UN proposed that Kyiv, Moscow, and Ankara start preparatory work for the transit of Russian ammonia through Ukraine as it tries to salvage a deal allowing safe Black Sea grain exports. Only 500 people are left in the eastern Ukrainian city of Bakhmut, which has been subject to heavy fighting in the last year, which is a tiny fraction of the pre-war population of 70,000. Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Russian mercenary group Wagner, has said he has asked prosecutors to investigate crimes committed by senior Russian defense officials before and during the invasion of Ukraine. Analysis from the Kyiv Post suggests about 90% of 500 missiles and drones launched by Russia in May in attacks on Ukraine failed. Apologies for the technical difficulties. I hope you are still tuned in. We'll be continuing on with the stories, but it'll just be me running you through the stories. And Linda is also back in the studio with us as
Hello.
well. So, our next story of the night is the 2-child limit on UK welfare benefits has left hundreds of thousands of families in poverty. This controversial 2-child benefit limit which restricts welfare payments to larger families in an attempt to force parents to find work, has failed to increase employment levels, but it has left hundreds of thousands of households in poverty, according to the first study of its kind. The government introduced the two-child limit in 2017, arguing that removing eligibility for benefits worth $3,000 per year per child for a family's third and subsequent children would incentivize parents to move into work or work more hours to make up the difference. However, the study says the policy's impoverishment of larger low-income households has helped few parents to get a job. Instead, its main function has been to push families further into poverty and damage their mental health. We found that rather than increasing employment, the two-child limit increases poverty and hardship, and that this can actually make it harder for parents to take up work, said Kitty Stewart, a co-author of the study and an associate professor at the School of Social Policy in the London School of Economics. The policy, called the worst social security policy ever by one academic expert, shortly after its introduction, is now estimated to affect about 1.5 million children, with more than 1 million of them growing up in poverty. More than half the households affected are working families. The SNP responded to the report by once again demanding that the UK government finally scrap the cruel two-child cap. SNP social justice spokesperson David Linden MP said the UK Tory government is the only government in the world that caps benefits after the second child, and that speaks volumes. And we know that the policy is now just futile and cruel, given it has not achieved its aims and it has only served to push hundreds of thousands into poverty. The policy, which has been around for 5 years longer than it should have, must go. It is exacerbating child poverty and undermining our efforts in Scotland to tackle it, and it has no place in a modern society. Linda, do you agree with David Linden that this policy has no place in a modern society?
Absolutely, Saoirse. It's just, I can't believe it's been 5 years. I remember when it was first introduced, no one could quite believe that here we are in what's supposed to be a developed economy with a welfare system, that we're capping benefits after two children. Absolutely awful. And the justification was that it was incentivise people. My goodness, poverty doesn't incentivise anyone. It's a ridiculous statement to have made, a ridiculous policy to have put in place. And it was only the Tory government who actually thought that this was something that should be done. Uh, you know, Academics, charities, people that work in the front line and trying to help people out of poverty all knew that this would just make things worse. So here we have a major study that's saying that beyond doubt it has made it worse. It hasn't incentivised anyone. It's incentivised depression, it's incentivised mental health issues, it's incentivised hungry children. And it does have a direct effect in Scotland because universal credit is which is the sort of encompassing benefit these days that was brought in by the Tories. It covers the whole of UK. It's a UK issue, and all that the Scottish government can do is to try to mitigate it as far as possible. There have been some successes. While there's an academic study that says quite clearly that the UK government is pushing more people into poverty, more children into poverty. Audit Scotland, amongst others, has talked about, how free childcare in Scotland has helped. But more important, the study that has been carried out of the Scottish Child Payment, which has helped over 300,000 children in Scotland, is quite clear. That the Scottish Government has done good things here. But it's mitigation. The Scottish Government shouldn't have to be mitigating the excesses of Westminster policy. What we should be doing here is, adding value to things, not having to make up for horrendous policies. So David London's absolutely right in everything he says. I mean, I noted that he said it's the only government in the world that does this. I would qualify that by saying, the only government which purports to have a welfare safety net in place that says, but in order to be caught by that safety net, you dare not have any more than 2 children. It's a horrendous policy. It's bad government. And
And what do you think it will take for the Tories to reverse this policy? Do you think that hundreds of thousands in poverty is enough? Like, how long do you think it will be until this policy gets revoked?
Well, I certainly haven't heard any hints at all that they're even considering revocation of this policy. Um, the Tories are very, very good at just ignoring academic studies, just ignoring evidence that's placed in front of them from people who actually know what they're talking about. Very good at making up reasons as to why people are in poverty. So I don't see them reversing it at all. I don't see any hints at all that there's a caring government there. Um, I'll also have to say, I haven't heard anything hugely positive from Labour either on this. I remember at the time when the policy was introduced, I may be wrong, but I think it might have been Yvette Cooper who was the one who was talking against this and talking very well against it. But I can't really remember of late hearing any Labourites saying that it would be reversed.
So, our next story, we're leaving Westminster and going up to Holyrood. The Scottish Government have delivered on the 1,140 hours early learning and childcare provisions target. This comes from a new report from Audit Scotland, which has found that the Scottish Government, councils and partners have done well to increase early learning and childcare (ELC) provision to 1,140 hours per year per child, despite the challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, they have warned that the sector remains fragile. Councils completed most of the building projects needed by the deadline of August 2021 and have recruited significantly more ELC staff. The numbers of 3 and 4-year-olds receiving ELC remains high. More 2-year-olds are now participating, and most parents are happy with the flexible arrangements. The Scottish Government has developed plans to assess the policy and whether it has improved children's lives and helped parents to work, study, or train. But that evaluation work will be more difficult because of the impact of COVID-19 on children's development and their families' financial situations. This appraisal came in the same week that new figures showed 303,000 children are in receipt of the Scottish Government's game-changing Scottish Child Payment, which gives families £25 per week per eligible child straight to their pockets. This week, an IPPR report also praised the Scottish Government's ELC policy for its positive impact in tackling poverty, citing that at least 10,000 people were held above the poverty line over 2017 to 2020 by the incomes earned while children were in free childcare. Commenting, Cowcab Stewart, MSP, said, "It is great to see the SNP's action on supporting families making a difference. With the news that the 1,140-hour free childcare expansion has been fully implemented and the IPPR report highlighting this government's action on free childcare is having a positive impact on poverty. This progressive policy is stopping families from paying through the nose for childcare at a time when other bills are continuously rising as a result of the cost of living." Linda, when you compare the two governments' policies towards children and childcare, what do you think that tells you about the difference between Westminster and Holyrood?
Oh, well, Saoirse, can I say, first of all, you're doing very well here because I can hear all the gremlins that you're putting up with in the studio in the background. Good for you. Um, it sounds like a bit of a cliche now, but what we really do have here is a tale of two governments because you've got the government in Westminster who quite clearly don't care about the effects of their policies, but you have a government in Scotland that recognises what's happening, that knows that people are finding things really hard, therefore they have to mitigate the UK government policies. But even out with that, there was a recognition years ago in Scotland from the current Scottish government that one of the most important things that could be done was free childcare to free people up to be able to go to their work, to be able to have a better earning capacity rather than going out to work where a lot of their wages were just going on childcare. And it was difficult. It certainly wasn't easy because I remember being in Parliament at the time when it was announced, and councils, local authorities, were told and asked to step up to the mark in this, and they all did their bit. But it was not easy because a lot of places didn't have adequate facilities for good childcare. There was issues about nurseries, yes. There was issues about child minding. There was an awful lot that had to be done to achieve this. And I actually think that having achieved it for the deadline in capital projects and in the resources, uh, when you consider what we went through with COVID, I think they've done a fantastic job. And I'm really pleased that Audit Scotland have recognised that. Yes, it's fragile, but that's a mark of everything that Scotland's been through in the last few years. So I would say well done to local authorities, well done to the Scottish Government, and well done to all those that fought so hard to let this be achieved. And I noticed the UK government keep talking about free childcare and what they're going to do. They're way behind Scotland in this, and I think we've shown that this works. So you've got free childcare here, you've got the Scottish Child Payment that's been praised and lifting people out of poverty, and you've got a UK government that still says, even faced with the evidence that it doesn't work, that only giving benefits to two children and no more will incentivise work and alleviate poverty. They haven't a clue.
And hopefully, Scottish Government will keep pushing and keep progressing.
Yeah.
So, our next story of the night. Ahead of a Labour event tonight, former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown has been urged to apologise for promises he made to the people of Scotland before the independence referendum. Ahead of the 2014 referendum, Gordon Brown urged people in Scotland to vote against independence and instead back his plans. He said that the UK would be as close to a federal state as you can be within a year or two. Commenting, JB Hepburn said on the eve of the 2014 referendum, Gordon Brown made promises that would have made even a snake oil salesman blush. He could not have been clearer that if the people of Scotland voted against independence, in his own words, that we're going to be within a year or two as close to a federal state as you can be. Within that time period, we have been dragged out of the EU against our will, and the powers of our parliament are under attack like never before. The Sewell Convention, which was supposed to prevent Westminster overriding the Scottish Parliament, is now routinely being breached. Laws passed in inexplicably devolved areas are struck down at the stroke of the Scottish Secretary's pen. And the Foreign Secretary is sending out threatening letters to overseas embassies trying to restrict Scottish ministers' efforts to secure jobs and investment for Scotland. In contrast to what Gordon Brown promised, the reality is that we are about as far away from a federal state as you can get, and nothing that pro-Brexit Labour are proposing in their anemic devolution proposals will make any difference. Jobs have been lost and living standards have been harmed because promises that Gordon Brown made were not kept. And before he needs to take the stage, he needs to apologise. Linda, as a former SNP MSP, what do you think? Do you think that Gordon Brown should be making a public apology? Do you think that his statements ahead of the referendum were wrong? What's your opinion on this?
Well, quite clearly wrong. I'm not convinced he should be making an apology. I would rather he just crawled away somewhere and never showed his face again. You know, it was nonsense when he said it at the time. We knew that. I've got his exact words here. I think they're almost imprinted in my brain, but I'll read them in case I've got them wrong. He said, I can understand how people are sceptical when promises are made. Well, you bet we're sceptical. That's because Labour have been making promises of federalism for years and years and years. Keir Starmer's still making promises about federalism. Gordon Brown then said, we're going to be within a year or two as close to a federal state as you can be in a country where one nation is 85% of the population. Well, I'll tell you how close that can be. When one nation is 85% of the population, federalism is impossible. And that's just the reality. You can look at all sorts of studies that have been done in federalism across the world. And where there is one dominant partner, like England, which has a much bigger population than either Scotland, Wales, or the north of Ireland, true federalism is impossible. They tried to sweeten it with talk of, oh yes, but the English regions will get their own assemblies. Notice they say assemblies and not parliaments. So, how is that federalism? He then said there's a mood that too much power rests in London, but that is about to change. Well, they'd no intention. I sat in the Smith Commission after the referendum, and the unionist parties, oh my goodness, they were not interested in federalism at all. They were interested in giving a few concessions here and there to try and make it look as if they were willing. But it was nowhere near true federalism that was on the table. It's still nowhere near federalism. The only thing that can really serve Scotland's needs is independence. A small, successful European nation. That's what Scotland can be, like so many other small, successful European nations. There's nothing unique about our country that says we can't do it. We're just as smart as everyone else. We have more resources than many, many others. In fact, I would take as an example, look at Ireland, smaller than us, just as smart as us because we're largely the same folks, but they don't have anywhere near the resources that Scotland has. And they're streets ahead of the UK at the moment. Gordon Brown, crawl away, don't come back, we've heard enough of you. Keir Starmer, stop trying to pull the wool over Scotland's eyes.
Strong words. I love it. Incredible.
Oh,
yeah. Amazing. So our next story, we are moving back down to Westminster. The Cabinet Office has failed to hand over Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages, diaries and notebooks as COVID inquiry deadlines are to expire. The deadline for this expired at 4 p.m. this afternoon, with the government having seemed to completely refuse to comply with the inquiry chairwoman, Lady Hallett's order to disclose the documents. Following the refusal, the Cabinet Office has announced that it is to launch a legal action against the official COVID public inquiry in a last-ditch attempt to avoid handing over Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApps. The unprecedented move was confirmed in a letter from the Cabinet Office to the inquiry headed by retired Judge Heather Hallett, who had extended her 4 p.m. Tuesday deadline to today to give the UK government time to comply with her demands for evidence. Lady Hallett said that as the legally appointed chair of the inquiry, it is for her and the inquiry to determine what is and is not relevant. A Savanta poll released this morning found that 61% of UK citizens think Boris Johnson's unredacted diary entries and WhatsApp messages should be handed over to the COVID inquiry. On Wednesday, Boris Johnson handed over a major cache of WhatsApp messages and notebooks to the Cabinet Office and said that he was happy for them to be handed over to Lady Hallett. However, the Cabinet Office is resisting passing these on to the inquiry, in part because some of the fear is that the inquiry could request the WhatsApp messages of serving ministers, not least Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. Linda.
Oh my.
So, I mean, do you is this just another example of the Conservative Party, cronyism and corruption, hiding COVID, everything? What do you think?
You couldn't make this stuff up. It's like something out one of these political novels or a TV series. Um, I mean, I wouldn't trust Boris Johnson as far as I could throw him in any way, I have to say. And when I heard yesterday that he had handed over all these things and put the responsibility onto the Cabinet Office, I thought, he's not done that lightly. There's a reason for that. Um, and also, I learned today that he seemingly, it's not all of them. He has only handed them over from a specific date. And there's issues about dates previous to that. I can't remember off the top of my head what the dates are. But my first thought was that he's trying to stick the boot into Rishi Sunak here because he's not quite forgiven him. So the Cabinet Office are, wanting to be redacting messages of serving cabinet ministers, I guess. But it would seem like there's a lot in there that would have a problem for some of them. It would seem that there may be stuff in there that would encourage the inquiry to ask for messages from perhaps Rishi Sunak, perhaps from Grant Shapps and others. So there's a bit of a panic going on. They're saying it's about precedent. What else are they going to get up to that will be at the same level as what we've seen over the COVID period? I would hate to think. So they've gone for judicial review on it, so that will be very, very interesting. I guess it's just watch the space. But what it is doing is delaying yet again any results coming out of the inquiry, any, what could you say, recompense, I don't know. It's delaying any blame being laid on any of these people. Now, I also think Boris Johnson probably have gathered that the Cabinet Office would go to judicial review rather than hand everything over. So, is he playing games? How long until we get a resolution to any of this stuff? The Tories are very good at putting things off and hoping that time just passes and everyone forgets about it and it's not news anymore. So there's a bit of that game going on as well.
Do you think that this review, if the judicial review finds in favour of the Conservatives, or of the Home Office, do you think the review will stand up at all without this evidence? Do you think that they maybe have gathered enough information as it stands?
I have no idea. I have absolutely no idea what they've got. I mean, Lady Hallett will have to make her report. It would depend if they can't get a hold of these messages. These whatever they are, WhatsApp messages, all sorts of things. She'll have to make a report with her commission on their views on that. They may surmise reasons as to why it was the case because of information they've already got. But it will all take some time. And, that's what I was saying, this thing about if they can stave it off long enough, does something else come in, take over? Therefore, it's not headlines anymore.
Do you think that the claim of it sets a dangerous precedent, do you think that's valid in any way? Do you think that the precedent could be seen as dangerous?
Well, what what I could see in it about redaction, I think there's very often a valid reason for redaction. I mean, that was something I had to deal with myself in a committee that I chaired in Parliament while I was there. And sometimes it's about protecting people, and it may not just be cabinet ministers or senior civil servants. It may be very junior civil servants. It may be just members of the public, whatever. So there's valid reasons for redaction. But the thing is, if it's purely about redacting information about serving cabinet ministers, I think that's quite worrying, because in the interests of transparency, we should know what they're about. And they don't just have to hand everything over without explanation. If there's something in there that they look at that and say, oh, that looks bad, but actually what that was about was da 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 da, there's no reason why they can't submit some backup information that the Lady Hallett's Commission can look at as well. So I think the going straight to judicial review like that and always having the intention to do so would suggest to me that they weren't even willing to look at it properly.
I think that's a pretty astute observation from you there. So our next story, a former US Treasury Secretary has said that Brexit will be seen as a historic economic error. And that is how it will be remembered, in the way that it damaged the UK economy and has helped to drive inflation higher, according to former US Treasury Secretary Larry Summers. Singling out the UK's departure from the EU as a factor for higher costs, Summer also criticised the UK's economic policy as substantially flawed for some years. Brexit reduced the competitiveness of the UK economy, put downwards pressure on the pound and increased pressure and upwards pressure on prices, limited imports of goods and limited in some ways the labour supply. Summers told a BBC Radio 4 Today programme, all of which contributed to higher inflation, he added. Official figures last week showed inflation remained stubbornly high at 8.7% in the UK, as households come under pressure from the fastest annual rise in food prices since the late 1970s. US consumer prices have been slowing in recent months, dropping to an annual inflation rate of 4.9% in April. In a stark critique of the UK's management of the economy, Summers did not spare the Bank of England. He blamed the central bank for higher levels of inflation, saying these were reinforced by very ill-judged monetary policies that were substantially too expansionary for too long. Summer said that he did not want to forecast the trajectory of the UK economy, but would leave this to the British experts. But he said he would be surprised if 2 more years passed without the UK entering into a recession. A recent report showed that UK households have paid £7 billion since Brexit to cover the extra cost of trade barriers on food imports from the EU. Researchers from the London School of Economics estimated the impact of leaving the bloc on UK food prices and found that trade barriers consistently hampered imports, pushing up bills by an average of £250. The UK has the highest food inflation rate in the industrialised world, according to recent inflation data. The LSE researchers calculated the cost of food in the UK had rocketed by 20% since 2019, but this would have only been 17% without post-Brexit trade restrictions, nearly a third lower. Linda, seeing all the lists laid out there of all the impacts of Brexit, you can't help but understand his point of view there. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he's talking about a historic error. The only people that will look at it as a historic error may be those that voted leave, because for so many people, it was a current error. We knew it was an error. We knew it was going to be bad. The warning signs were there. They were all told. However, people were fooled by a UK government that were playing games with each other and a power play going on internally. And yes, I think the chap's absolutely right. This will be in history books, modern studies and then history books about this massive mistake that was made by the UK government. So he talked about limited goods, he talked about limited labour supply, but it's also about limited rights for people. You know, limited rights and free movement, the limited rights that are still to come down the line, I'm pretty sure. When other things kick in. I mean, I know they've agreed that they won't just scrap all the EU regulations and stuff that were there, and that's an argument going on with the Tories just now. But they've already given the warning signs that they will, for example, erode employment rights. And again, I have to say, if there was another Tory government, it would just be absolutely horrendous. But if there's another Labour government, I'm not seeing anything that gives me any comfort whatsoever that will be a reversal of any of that stuff. So, yeah, the evidence is there, the proof is all there. Um, I was reading today that inflation in Spain, Saoirse, is at 3%. Now, the UK has always been very, very good at telling everybody how good they are in financial and economic management.
Mm-hmm.
Not this time, guys. You certainly are not. And I keep hearing UK government ministers saying things like, our inflation rate has come down more than anybody else in Europe in the last week, whatever. That may well be the case, but where did you start? You started heck of a high and you're still way up there beyond everyone else. So, historic error, current error, yeah. And I don't see anybody likely to be coming into power in the UK that's going to even try and reverse that current and error that's going to become historic. So again, I would just like to see Scotland making its own way in this. I would like an independent Scotland to be, well, I'd like it to be fully back into the EU, but I hope that discussions are going on with those and such as those from Scotland and across the EU to pave the way for Scotland to be able to take its rightful place back in the European Union.
That would be nice.
Yeah.
So, staying with America, a bill to raise the US debt ceiling has passed in the House of Representatives just days before the default. The House passed a bill to suspend the debt ceiling on Wednesday, clearing a major legislative hurdle with just days left before the US is expected to default. The final House vote was 314 to 117, with 149 Republicans and 165 Democrats supporting the measure. In a potentially worrisome sign, the House Speaker, Republican Kevin McCarthy, 71 members of his own conference opposed the deal that he brokered with President Joe Biden. Excuse me. Taking a victory lap after the bill's passage, McCarthy downplays concerns over divisions within the House Republican Conference and celebrated the policy concessions he secured in his negotiations with Biden. I have been thinking about this day before my vote for the Speaker because I knew the debt ceiling was coming. And I wanted to make history. I wanted to do something no other Congress has done, McCarthy told reporters after the vote. Tonight, we all made history. Biden applauded the House passage of the legislation, calling on the Senate to quickly take up the legislation to avoid a default. The Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, has warned that the federal government will be unable to pay its bills starting on the 5th of June unless it was allowed to borrow more. The debt ceiling bill passed by the House would suspend government's borrowing limit until January 2025, ensuring the issue will not resurface before the next presidential election. As a part of his negotiations with Biden, McCarthy successfully pushed for government spending cuts and changes to the work requirements for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. However, the concessions McCarthy won fell far short for members of the Freedom Caucus, who had pushed for steeper spending cuts and much stricter work requirements for benefits programs. The bill has now moved to the Senate today, where it is expected to pass with bipartisan support despite some dissent from far right and progressive left senators. Just quickly, Linda, what do you think that this shows you about the bipartisanship and the bipartisan issue in the House?
Well, oh wow, yeah. I've been reading about it. I don't follow it hugely closely. I've got enough to do following that lot down in Westminster, I have to say. First of all, I would say well done, McCarthy and Biden. I think they've really done well here. Earlier on, I read the deal, the concessions given by each side, and certainly it looks like it's been a proper negotiation. And McCarthy in particular has done well to get so many of the Republicans to back him on this. So well done, both. Um, what I do think it shows more than anything is the real split with the Republicans. It actually gives me some hope because everything we hear about the so-called grand old party, the Republicans in the US just now, uh, generally fills me with horror. You know, the stuff that's going on at state level by so many. You know, the fact that Trump is even likely to be running as president again, never mind perhaps becoming president again. And then you look at DeSantis and think, oh my goodness, I didn't think it could get worse than Trump, but here you go. Here's Trump with brains. It's really, really scary. So the fact that there's been enough Republicans there that have backed McCarthy in this is giving me some hope for the future, I have to say. So America's done some really great things in its time. It's also done some really awful things, and it's continuing to do some really awful things. The erosion of racial rights and women's rights, all rights, in fact. Uh, so, yeah, fingers crossed, this is a step forward. Um, and people have realised that you can't end up, just not being able to implement programs that stop people starving to death, because that's the bottom line.
That is the bottom line. That is very much the bottom line. So, moving back to Scotland, the Scottish Government has announced plans to extend protections for tenants. Emergency measures to protect tenants during the cost of living crisis, including the private rent cap and additional eviction protections, will be extended for a further 6 months if approved by Parliament. Tenants' Rights Minister Patrick Harvey has confirmed proposals to keep the Cost of Living Tenant Protection Act measures in place until the 31st of March 2024 at the latest. This would mean most in-tenancy private rent increases would continue to be capped at 3%. Alternatively, private landlords could apply for increases of up to 6% to help cover certain increases in costs in a specified time period where these costs can be evidenced. Enforcement of evictions would continue to be paused for 6 months for most tenants, except in a number of specific circumstances. Increased damages for unlawful evictions of up to 36 months' worth of rent would continue to be applicable. Social rented sector tenants are protected by the voluntary agreement reached with social landlords on below inflation rent increases for the financial year. Mr. Harvey said, as the cost of living crisis continues, these measures are giving important support to tenants, providing them with much needed stability in their housing costs and additional eviction protections. It's just another example of, would you say, the Scottish Government kind of trying to pull through for those who are struggling and protect tenants' rights, especially at a time where things can be so fragile during the cost of living?
Absolutely. I think I'm really pleased that this has been extended. And I think it was an excellent policy to have brought in the first place. And, back to what I said earlier about the difference between the two governments that Scotland lives under. Wouldn't it be much better if we only had one that sat in Edinburgh? However, What I would say is that there was something that Patrick Harvey said today that I was really pleased to hear about. He said, and again, I took a note of it at the time. Let me find it, Saoirse. Yeah. The necessity of these measures has been kept under review, and we will continue to assess whether they remain justified, balanced, and proportionate based on the financial pressures rented households and landlords are facing. Now, it's quite important because I understand from discussions I've had with various people that there were a couple of loopholes there that were being exploited. And it's not always worked as well as in the intention should have been. So I hope part of this is looking at these things. And also important, looking how to transition out of the emergency measures is something else they're doing. Because you can't just stop something like that and then allow, for example, let's say you've got a rogue landlord with, say, a dozen flats, which happens these days. Right to buy properties in poorer areas have very often ended up in a landlord's portfolio. You can't just say, right, it stops now, and have a landlord trying to either evict people or impose bigger rent rises, and all the fights that would entail, and the stress that it would cause to tenants. So transitioning out of this is really, really important. You can't just guillotine it and say that's it over. So I'm sure there's work going on in the background, and I hope it'll be worthwhile.
Me too. Next story. Staying in Scotland, 52 beaches have won in Scotland's Beach Award. More than 50 beaches have scooped Scotland's Beach Award from environmental charity Keep Scotland Beautiful and will be flying the prestigious flag this summer. Scotland's Beach Award celebrates the achievements of well-managed beaches across Scotland, meaning that visitors and locals can choose where they want to visit with the knowledge that the beach is being looked after for people and the environment. Total of 52 beaches have received the award this year, from Aberdeenshire all the way to the Scottish borders. Fife retains its title as the region with the most awards, boasting 14 winning beaches. Aberdeenshire and East Lothian follow with 8 beaches receiving the award. Last year, we celebrated 30 years of beaches achieving awards, with St Andrews West Sands and Gillane Bents in East Lothian achieving the accolade consistently. Nairn Central and Aberdour Silver Sands have now received the accolade consistently for 3 decades. Additionally, 40 beaches on the list have successfully achieved an award for 10 or more years. In order to achieve Scotland's Beach Award, a range of criteria must be met, including beach safety, access to facilities, and cleanliness. Focusing on local environmental quality, the award is designed to complement the work undertaken by the Scottish Environment Protection Agency on bathing water quality. Jamie Ormiston, awards officer at Keep Scotland Beautiful, said Scotland's Beach Awards are the benchmark for quality, celebrating clean, well-managed and sustainable beaches. Our award-winning beaches demonstrate excellent beach management, and we hope that all who visit this year play their part in keeping them beautiful. I'd like to thank all those who do so much to protect, maintain and enhance our beaches, protecting the sand and sea for all of us to enjoy. Linda, which is your favourite Scottish beach to go to of a sunny day?
Oh my goodness. Well, being a Glasgow girl, we tended to go down Ayrshire way for beaches. However, the most, I can't remember what it's called, but the most beautiful beaches I've seen generally, just for wandering along, are in the Uists. They're just fabulous. White sand and beautiful water. Oh, and Barra, I better not miss out Barra. It's just absolutely stunningly beautiful. And it's really good that our beaches are getting these awards. And I'm old enough to remember a time when beaches were pretty grim. It was like taking your kids' health in their hands when you let them go swimming. But no, there's been so much work done over the years, not just by the environmental protection agencies and the various other organisations that do this, But there's a real pride in beaches from local people as well. So it's been a joint effort over decades that's allowed us to get consistent, and that's the secret, consistent awards for good beaches. So well done all.
Yeah. If you're going to the beach this summer, check out the list and you will see all of the beautiful beaches that Scotland has to offer across the country. So, our next story is the low emission zone, which comes into force in Glasgow today. Our reporter, Lewis McGlynn, took a look at how it was affecting the traffic on the streets. We have a video for you now.
As of today, Glasgow City Council will be enforcing a new low emission zone in and around the city centre. This means that vehicles brought into the LEZ must comply with the national emissions standards laid out in the 2019 Transport Scotland Act. In general, this means that any petrol vehicle registered after 2006 and diesel vehicles registered after 2015 will meet the LEZ requirements, while older vehicles generally won't. Any person bringing a vehicle into the LEZ that does not meet the requirements will face a penalty charge of £60, with the fee doubling each time the offending vehicle enters the zone. Glasgow City Council has stated that the low emission zone is an essential measure in order to reduce air pollution in the city. This is in response to unacceptably high levels of harmful nitrogen dioxide being measured within Glasgow's city centre. The council believe that not only will the LEZ reduce the level of nitrogen dioxide back to acceptable levels, but also increase the uptake of less polluting vehicles, as well as encourage people to move away from private car use and favour more environmentally friendly means of travel, such as public transportation. This new development is actually Phase 2 of the low emission zone, with Phase 1 being launched on the 31st of December back in 2018, which only affected buses. Under that legislation, many city buses were replaced with newer, lower emission as well as electric models that were in keeping with the Euro 6 emissions standard. Not everyone has welcomed the new low emission zone, however, with some detractors criticising it for being heavy-handed in its approach. Critics argue that since older models of vehicle are the ones that will be at risk of violating the LEZ, that poorer people who have been unable to upgrade their car to a newer model will be unfairly targeted. Others have said that despite public transport being an option, it is too unreliable to be considered a legitimate alternative to a personal vehicle. While there are some exemptions to the LEZ, notably for motorcycles, mopeds and blue badge holders, they are not universal. Homeless Project Scotland, a charity that does extensive work providing aid to homeless people within Glasgow and beyond, have stated that they will refuse an exemption for their refrigerated van to operate within the LEZ. The charity went on to say that this will severely impact their efforts within the city. Despite these concerns, Glasgow City Council seems confident that the LEZ will have a positive impact on both public health and the city overall. For now, only time will tell if this proves to be the case.
Linda,
Yeah.
with that video, what do you think? Do you think that the critiques outweigh the positives, or do you think that the potential positives outweigh the negatives?
Haha, I can understand the concerns, and can I say that I read before I came on, Saoirse, that the Homelessness Project Glasgow and the refrigerated van have now received an exemption because they have got another van that is coming on stream fairly soon that will meet the requirements. So that's good news. I think that's been one of these things that have slipped through the net. Always happens with these kind of things. I think the low emission zone that Glasgow has done, I think it was brave. They're the first to have done it. I do understand the concerns that those with cars that may not comply could be said to be those who can't afford, a different car. So I would like to think that public transport, etc., did come up to the mark, that there was adequate space for people to go dump their car and get into the city if they need to quickly and easily. I don't know enough about it to know whether that's planned. I would have hoped these things would all have come together. It would seem from some of the reports that they haven't, but I think all in all, longer term, bigger picture, this is something that's necessary. And I know that other cities are going to be following suit. the first to do it always gets the hardest time.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this evening, Linda. You had some fabulous answers, great insight, and I hope you enjoyed being on the show.
I did very much. Thank you, Saoirse.
So that's it for this evening. Thank you for watching. Thank you for bearing with us with our technical difficulties, and I hope you also enjoyed the show. But before I go, I just wanted to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of you, our viewers. So to everyone who's donated and to everyone who has signed up to make regular monthly payments, thank you so much. Our programmes will, of course, always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers, which will allow us to employ a staff and make even more programmes for you to enjoy. I'm Saoirse Healey. Thank you for watching and good night.